Hey guys, Chris here. Tonight I'm in the Sierra Nevada mountains and I have 3 stories for you. And all 3 of them have one thing in common, that they have an odd twist at the end of each story. That's next. Okay, you guys, I am along a cliff. I'm in the Sierra Nevadas tonight. Beautiful summer evening, early summer. And we got a beer for later. It's gonna have some water right now. And they got a couple of small lakes over behind me. And they got mosquitoes in them, so I'm hoping to dodge the skeeters for a while here till they find me. Also, there is some kind of a shelter over here. It appears to be man-made, but it looks very old. But I saw some couple of sawed ends on these logs, and it was kind of up against this cliff face on this dark side of the forest here. Maybe we'll check it out after this first story. But we have 3 stories tonight. All of them are very interesting. Okay, so our first story takes place in South Carolina, north of Myrtle Beach, small community called Little River. And this is where Dan was living in 2007. In April of that year, he was just simply going to the grocery store, walking to the grocery store late one evening after 9:15 or so. And he was walking along the sidewalk on Highway 17, along Highway 17. He's not in the wilderness. He's not in a national forest. He's not in the Smokies or something. He's in his community. And he's walking along this sidewalk. It's dark. There's a few streetlights scattered about. And he comes to this section where this creek comes in and goes under the road. And this creek, along this creek, and I don't know the name of it, but it's forested along here. And along this, parallel to this creek, was Eagle's Nest Road. And Eagle's Nest brought you to this golf course. I believe it was called Eagle's Nest Golf Course. And beyond that, this creek meandered and worked its way to the Peter Horry National Wildlife Refuge or area. And here is where they had swamps, marsh, wetlands, heavily forested, and creeks coming into it. And he didn't know this until later, because to him it was just this little greenway. He didn't really know where it went, but he looked at it after what happened to him. So he's walking along the sidewalk and he hears in this forest, there's a pretty good stretch of forest along the sidewalk there, and the creek is in the middle somewhere. And he hears something scattering about, moving back and forth as he approached. And at first he thought, okay, it's a deer, maybe it's a dog, I don't know. And he just kept walking. Went to the store. About 15, 20 minutes later, he comes walking back. He's got his milk and his snacks he wanted for that night and the milk for the next day. And he was approaching this same area where the creek was and this forest was. And he got about to the same spot where he heard the sound before, and he heard more sounds. He heard this scattering again, but this time it was louder. It was about 10, maybe 15 feet in front of him, and it really startled him because it was much louder. He moved away from the forest to the opposite side of the sidewalk. There was no traffic on the street at that time, so he could clearly hear. And he heard this stomping, this loud stomping coming through the forest towards him. Maybe parallel to him. He wasn't sure, but it spooked him. It really spooked him. And he kept moving. He didn't want to run, but he moved quickly. And he was moving through this area where this forest was. And then he stopped to look behind him. And whatever this thing was, it stopped at the same time, just a moment after he stopped. And he looked and he listened, he didn't hear anything, and he started walking again. He could hear the footsteps again. coming through the forest as he walked. He stopped again, and it stopped again. And it repeated this process as he traveled about 3/4 of the way along this forested stretch where the creek was in the middle. And he got to this section where there was this street light. And he did another stop, and he looked over his left shoulder, and he looked down past this guardrail on the opposite side of the guardrail, and he saw this. He called it a creature. It was squatting down like this, and it had these large arms out in front of it, just sitting there, watching him, kind of moving a little bit back and forth. It didn't make a sound, but it was sitting there, and you could see it in the light. It was at the edge of the forest, some tall grass, and this guardrail, creeks behind it somewhere, and totally spooked him. He said it looked like an orangutan, maybe a skunk ape, had this reddish brown hair, 4 or 5 inches long, and this very long face. Kind of spooky, but it didn't appear threatening. He turned and continued walking. And later he said he had this feeling, this overwhelming sense that this thing was lonely. And it was just toying with him, kind of messing with him to get his attention. And I don't know what that meant, if you wanted to be friends with him or something. I have no idea. But he just got this sense that it was lonely. Dan is still unsure what he really saw, but he does know what he did see, and that was, it looked very ape-like, and these long arms. It was hard to tell how tall it was, but it had pretty broad shoulders, and it was just squatting down, staring at him. Now, this area, it eventually leads about 5 miles from there to the Waccamaw River, and there it's very much marsh and swamp, and very plausible, but something could live along this corridor and end up going back and forth to the this refuge in the river. But that is our story. That is our first story from Dan. Okay, before this next story, I got a beer. We're going to do a quick review on it. It's a Lagunitas Little Something Something, and that is from Petaluma, California, 7.5 ABV. I got the Jack Link's Sasquatch. It's kind of spooky looking. Well, Sasquatch are pretty nice, I think. I haven't met one yet, but I know they're around. I've had my experiences up. So, all right. This is, very amber. And that is a smooth and silky IPA. Wow, first impressions, very bold, very strong. Little bitter finish to it. Smooths out pretty quick. Not too bad. I like it. It's a pretty strong beer. Sometimes I'm just not up for a strong beer. I've been sick the last few days, so hopefully this video is going to be okay with me talking and stuff. But yeah, I kind of like that though. So little something something. There you go. Cheers. So this next story takes place in the Sierra Nevada, not too far from where I am right now. South of here, towards Bridgeport, and just north of there is Levit Meadows. And I've been there before. I took the road and followed it up past Levit Meadows to the Levit Falls. And from there, you're up pretty high and you're looking down at this valley, this meadow. Just beautiful. It extends south of the highway there for a long ways. And then you got this towering Levit Falls coming through this canyon. You can see it all in one view here. And I went up the road further. I did a video a couple of years ago there. And this is where Jan, her husband Kevin, and their son Jeremy were going to go hiking for the day. They were going to start out at the Levit Meadows trailhead, go along the meadow. It's on the west side of this meadow, and the West Walker River flows through the meadow, and then they go through this narrow canyon, and it opens up into this area where there's a couple of lakes that are connected by a creek, and it was called Roosevelt Lake, and they were going to go fishing there. So they worked their way south on this trail through the canyon, got to this lake. They fished till about 2:30 in the afternoon. They were done. They decided to start heading back, and they noticed throughout the day, while they're on the trail, they saw some traffic. They saw a pack train. They saw other hikers. They saw a backpacker with a dog. And they came to the spot where they were reading this Forest Service signboard about the California Trail and the immigrants crossing the Sierra Nevada in their wagons. And while they were there, they heard this yell off in the distance. It's kind of like a shout, and it sounded human-like, so they just assumed it was a person. And their son yelled back, and then it responded to him. But it was odd because it didn't appear to be on the trail. It appeared to be a little bit off the trajectory of the trail. But they didn't think anything of it. They were like, well, it's got to be a person. They continued on, and they were trying to stay back. There was a pack train that was kicking up some dust, and they wanted to stay back from that. They're continuing to get out of there to go back home, and they came to a point where they had a water break, and they heard something behind them. Sounded like it was on the trail, and it made this kind of a stomping sound again, or on the trail stomping and coming towards them. They went, oh, okay, well, there's some people coming, so let's just get up and get going. So they finished their water break, and they continued on. And then they got to the southern end of the Levit Meadows. When they first approached the Levit Meadow, her husband and her son were ahead of her about 20 feet. And she saw them up ahead, and they both stopped and turned and were looking down into the meadow. They're on this, again, on this trail that's side sloping this hill, and then the meadow is very flat. And as she approached them, her husband, without looking over to her, just still staring straight ahead, he said, "What is that?" As they looked, from the beginning, it was very odd. They saw this dark shape, very large, and it appeared to be floating above the meadow, meaning it was moving and just moving effortlessly across the meadow like this. Now, this was on the other side of the West Walker River, and there was some brush in between along the river and some grass, but they could clearly see this thing moving and moving rapidly. And they stared at it for 15, 20 seconds, just moving very quickly on the east side of the river. At first, it didn't make any sense, and they thought, is that a backpacker? And they had seen people all day on horseback, backpackers, hikers. Is that a backpacker on a bicycle? And he's just moving effortlessly and quickly. The only thing that made sense. And then they thought, no, it's all black. It's got a black hat and a black jacket and a black backpack and black pants. Also, it was not leaning over like it was on a bicycle. And they could clearly see it was upright, and there's some little bit of arm swing, and it was just effortlessly moving across. And then he thought, also with the heat, it was about 80, 85 degrees. It was August. And anybody wearing all black and moving that quickly with a backpack, it's just very awkward running with a backpack. And this thing was very smooth. So it was very strange. And as it was moving, it was extremely mesmerizing for them. They're all just staring in silence at it. And it was starting to get out of view. And at that moment, her husband and her son ran up the trail without saying a word. And they got to this next high point, and they continued to be able to see it. And she caught up with them, and they all stood in amazement and in silence watching this thing. Jan caught up to them in just a few moments, and she said she got to the top, and as she approached, her son yelled out. He just went, "Hey," really loud. This thing stopped on a dime, and it turned and looked right at them. And she said it was very inhuman how it turned. Its whole upper body turned towards them like this. And they could now see this profile of this thing, very broad shoulders, all black, because it was so far away, 200 yards or so, whatever it was, that it just became this silhouette, and it was staring at them. And they stared at it for 10, 15 seconds, and then it turned, and then it just immediately kicked into this high pace again and continued this fluid gliding trajectory on the other side of the meadow. And they watched it until it disappeared out of sight. Now, before it disappeared, it just continued to move at this same pace, and it had this gliding smoothness to it. It wasn't going faster or slower. It just started up again and just continued. It was really odd. Again, odd. Her husband assumed it was on the other side, obviously, but it was on the hiker's path over. There was a trail on the other side, and assumed it was on that. They looked at the maps later, and they guesstimated this thing about 7 feet tall. So it was not human. And it was too far to really tell what it was, but it was very, very concerning and very odd. The best way to describe it is like this, and this is what Jan had to say. The thing had a head that sat directly on its shoulders. It did not appear to have a neck. That is why we at first thought it was a backpacker. It went head, broad shoulders, or backpack, no neck, large body. We could not discern its legs or arms due mostly to the angle at which it was leaving us. The grass in the meadows obscured some of the legs. We have spent many hours in the woods. My husband was raised in Plumas County. That's where I go all the time. Neither he nor I have ever seen anything like this. It could not have been a bear. They can't walk that far on 2 legs, nor that smoothly or quickly. This was an unhuman pace. And that is our story from Jan and her family in Levit Meadows in the Sierra Nevada. You guys hearing that? I think it's a woodpecker. It's starting to be sundown. I got one more story to go here. And now I can hear it. And we got mosquitoes are out and about, and they found me. But the next one's pretty short. It's a really good story. It's from one of our viewers. Okay. So we're hanging on to some daylight here. Is at Marshy Lake. And here is this quasi structure up here. See that? Very intentional. Built. We can see the sawed cut ends and these logs. Looks very old. There's no garbage. Somebody built something here. Very much, not really much left of whatever it is. But yeah, somebody did some work here at one time to build this. This next story comes to us from one of our viewers. Her name is Kathy. She grew up in Maine, and the story takes place about 11 years ago, 2014, that summer. And she grew up spending her summers and fall at a camp that her parents owned on Mattawamkeag Lake. And prior to that, her parents had a camp there as well, meaning they had private property and they built this little camp to spend time at, enjoy nature and enjoy each other. They're at the southern end of this lake, and summer of 2014, she wanted to go there and visit her mom and dad and bring the grandkids and her daughter, Jamie, and just play in the lake, enjoy cooling off, and then visit the mom and dad and have dinner and barbecue, whatever they're going to do. And they're at this little beachfront, watching the kids, playing with the kids, having a good time. And she noticed her daughter's 4-year-old son, or grandson, Conlin, was on the shore and he was going back and forth and picking up rocks and just throwing them and just doing what kids do. And then she turned and watched the other kids and then a moment later, her daughter tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Mom, where's Conlin?" And she looked and she said, "He was here a second ago." And she looked out at the water, didn't see him, looked along the shore and to the left and to the right, and they didn't see him anywhere. So she said, "He probably went up to the camp." She went up the hill towards the camp, about 35 feet away. She saw her mom and dad at the picnic table, and she immediately said, "Did you guys see Conlin? Have you seen him?" And they said no. And right at that moment, her daughter, Jamie, came up behind her. She heard their response, and she immediately was in a panic. They all got up, the adults did, and immediately started calling out and searching for Conlin, 4-year-old Conlin. They're moving around the camp, going wider and wider, and they can't find him anywhere. Down by the lake, by the camp. They head up to the road, and they're going down the road, calling out his name. Her daughter, Jamie, is in a state of panic and bordering hysteria. Don't blame her. Kathy gets this idea to go back along the edge of the camp and head towards the other camp that's a ways off. And they hadn't seen anyone there all summer, but she just had something told her to go towards this other camp. Just go right straight through the forest. So she's working through this forest, and it's very dense. It's very thick forest with boulders, and there's even sinkholes and a lot of downed trees. Just not a forest for small children to be lost in. And she's going through this forest, and she gets to this point where she sees this downed tree, and then there's another tree like this and some brush in front of it. And she kind of knows, okay, if I want to go in this direction, I got to navigate through that. So she navigates through this area. And before she gets to this section where the trees cross, she sees sitting up, several feet up in this tree, her grandson, Conlin. And she's relieved, but she's also confused. And she looks to the left, looks to the right, and says, "Conlin, hi. Did you not hear Mama and Nana calling your name?" And he's sitting up in this tree smiling, and he said, "No." And she said, "How in the heck did you get up here?" And he said, "That man put me up here." She looked around. She didn't see anyone. She said, "There's no one here. Do you mean Papa?" And he said, "No, that big man put me here." And she was in shock. There was a big man that put him up in this tree. So she said, "Okay." And she grabbed him, pulled him down. She said she's 5'5". She had to reach up and get him and pull him down. And she carefully worked her way through the forest around this deadfall and these boulders. And then she started shouting out, "Hey, I found him. I found Conlin." And to their relief, they came moving towards her, and they were so relieved to see him. And they were just overjoyed that they found him. And she told him where she had found him in the forest, pretty far back there, up in this tree. Kathy said in an email, "I have never told this story to anyone. In fact, it upset my daughter so much that she would not talk about it at all. I messaged her this morning," this is a little while ago, "and asked if she minded that I share this story, and she said she was fine with it. I hope you decide to use my story in your channel. I'll be watching. Stay safe and keep hiking. Sincerely, Kathy." that is our story from Kathy, but really wild. So grateful they found Conlin. Must have been an absolutely scary moment in their lives that they'll never forget. And then to find him in such a way with a possible Bigfoot connection as how he got up in that tree. So that is our third story. And the mosquitoes are making dinner out of me here. So I have to go. We are almost at the verge of hiking out after dark. So I'm going to get the headlight out and we're going to start hiking and see how it turns out. So I'll have you guys come with me. Very nice evening, minus all the bugs. Gotta say. I don't think I'll be coming back here for a while until the bugs go away. That's when the water evaporates, dries up. These are just temporary seasonal ponds. No fish in them, at least that I know of. And yeah, but I left this stone wall down here. You can see it very well, that there's a stone wall that goes way down there towards the birds. All right. Got the camera adjusted again. The headlight will not be needed, because I think we're going to make it back to the truck without it. And we are down at the lower end of this lake. Yeah. Did you guys hear that? There was something over there. Oh. I heard a noise. All right, you guys, that was a lot of fun. Glad you were hanging out with me tonight. It's kind of the kickoff to summer. It feels like we're out of the spring cycle of rain and variable weather and all that. So if you guys like what I do, like and subscribe. You guys all know how to do that. And we will see you on the next one. As always, keep hiking.